Our next panel, who will be working their way up, will be dealing with a new cutting edge, the new frontier issues that we are dealing with in agribusiness having to do with food safety. Our moderator is Christine Weingart. Come on up. Don't leave me up here alone. Christine is with Dean Mead. She is one of our triple gators. She has her undergraduate, her JD, and her Master's of Tax from the University of Florida. Christine is also very active on the Florida 4-H Foundation, and the reason I say that, I was getting ready for today's presentation, Christine, and it dawned on me, we've had a member of our firm on that foundation board for over 20 years.
Yes, we have.
And the other reason that resonates today is that's where I first met Adam Putnam. Adam was the student representative on the 4-H Foundation board when I served on it some 20 years ago. Christine is my go-to person for cutting-edge topics. When the renewable energy issues came to the forefront and there were tax incentives, credits, and disguised subsidies, Christine's the person who worked with me to develop our materials for that. When the discussions of carbon credits came forth, and we did what I think is probably one of the most cited published materials on the tax consequences of carbon credits, Christine was my go-to person. And now the new frontier of the issues dealing with food safety, which has become so much more evident with the Food Safety Modernization Act enacted earlier this year, and GAP, which for all the accountants in the room means nothing to what you think it means. It's good agricultural practices have become buzzwords that resonate throughout agribusiness. So I'll turn over the panel to Christine and her presenters.
Good morning. I want to start out by saying I think our materials are under tab 3. We had quite a bit more materials. Karen convinced me to knock it down a little so that you weren't hauling around a 20-pound binder. But I understand that early next week she's going to send around an email that's going to give you some links to some more material. So if you don't get enough today, there's definitely more coming. My panelists today, on my left, Mr. Mike Ziegler, who is the president and CEO of Agricultural Resource Management, a citrus production consulting company, which also does third-party certification, which we'll be talking about a little bit more later. He got his BA in Business Administration from Florida Atlantic University, an MBA and a Master's in Agriculture from the University of Florida, so go Gators. And to my right, Mr. Eric Graves, who is the CEO of ABC Research Corporation, which is a full-service food testing laboratory and one of the largest independent food testing companies in the United States. I am actually going to let them talk a little bit more about themselves first and their companies.
Okay.
If you want to go first.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. I've been involved with ABC Research for several years now. We do a full complement of food testing. We are an ISO 17025 accredited laboratory, and we're also NELAC accredited for water testing. My experience in this particular industry is that it's rapidly changing and driven by regulations. And I think that in the future, there's going to be nothing more than more regulations. And certainly, food, as we see it, is going to be closer and closer to pharmaceutical type scrutiny within the regulatory environment.
Mike?
I provide direct services with the producers, primarily in citrus, along with packing house operations in fresh citrus. What we see is very much what Eric has mentioned. We will be moving toward a very structured system for food safety and product quality. And the impact of this movement is primarily through this recently introduced Food Safety Modernization Act.
Well, that's a nice lead-in. The title of our panel is Food Safety, FSMA, and Global Initiatives. So I thought we might start by having Mike talk a little bit about what the Food Safety Modernization Act is and what its history and impact were.
Well, it was signed in January of this year, and its an amendment to the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act that was established in 1938. It makes certain amendments to that act. What it does, though, is to spell out an overall performance standard, which is if you provide a product into a commercial market in the United States, which the FDA controls and manages or has oversight, you must provide a product that is not adulterated according to the Section 402 and is not misbranded. So you have to achieve the performance standard. In order to perform this standard, the FDA in its Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act originally wanted to correct deficiencies. Now the paradigm shift is into mandate preventive controls. And this goes all the way from the facility, a 415 facility, all the way back to the producer. And it especially focuses on 6 issues: soil amendments, hygiene, packaging, temperature, animals in the growing area, and water. So those are process standards that will be implemented, and they'll be implemented by the issuance of a guideline document, which is anticipated at the end of this year or early next year. So it will be very, very important for all the producers, facility manufacturers, processors, and packers to comment when that rule, proposed rule, is published in the Code of Federal Regulations in the Federal Register. There's a 75-day permit or comment period, and we have an obligation now to structure our guideline principles based on what we already know. And very fortunately, from our perspective in citrus, we are already performing most, if not all, of the preventive controls. So we should have really the criterion of documenting what we do.
So Mike mentioned process standards and different guidelines that are going to be released. Can you speak a little bit as to how that's going to impact our producers, our agricultural producers specifically?
I can address that a little bit. Basically, I don't want to cover what Mike covered, but from an historic perspective, in 2010, there was a public-private partnership announced between the USDA, the FDA, and Cornell University. It was a 3-year study funded through those agencies for $1.15 million. And Cornell is a leader with its GAPS program. As Mike mentioned, in January 2012, that's when the guidance period will begin. I want to kind of cover a timeline of what I see as the important points in time where things have to be complete. Of course, your contribution to the comments is critical. And from the regulators that I've talked to, they really do pay attention to the comments, so it is really important. Within the final rule must be published by a year after the guidance period, so that would be January 2013. And then 6 months after enactment, food facilities, both domestic and foreign, are required to register with the FDA every 2 years. Within 18 months of the end of the comment period, FDA must promulgate regulations establishing minimum standards for the effective implementation of preventative controls, including about 10 different items, which are, can be found in your handout: biological, chemical, etc. And they must expressly include preventive controls, sanitation, training, etc. And then you must monitor and track the controls. And plans must have steps to make sure that the food is evaluated and prevented from entering commerce if controls are not properly implemented or ineffective. And of course, there's a record-keeping requirement. The next part of that would be is that the certification, the third-party certification. I think that Mike can address something about GFSI.
One of the materials I think that you have outside of your packet is some information about Global Gap. So maybe you could talk about Global Gap and how the certification will tie in with that.
Sure. The Food Marketing Institute apparently heard enough from all of the agricultural producers concerning the number of audits that were required by the marketing supply chain partners. And there were many, many out there. And so often an agricultural producer or facility would be required to do 6, 8, or 10 audits. So the Food Marketing Institute, under their supervision, formed the Global Food Safety Initiative. The purpose of that was to review and register firms that provided third-party certifications. Among those firms is Global Gap. There's Safe Quality Foods, British Retail Consortium. There's a little array of the firms that do provide the third-party certifications. The one certification scheme that's been most active in the citrus fresh area is Global Gap. It started out as Europe Gap, European Retailer Partnership, Good Ag Practices. Then it morphed into Global Gap. Again, it's a global good ag practice because we had Chile Gap, Japan Gap, and everything else. Global Gap currently is in version 3.1. It will be obligatory to transition to version 4 in January of the coming year. And what it is basically is a series of 236 questions covering all farm activities. Those are the questions applying to all farm operations. A second section called Crops Base. For us, we are in a crop, not a livestock or a flower. And the third one is fruit and vegetables. So we are subject to the 3 different levels of inquiry. Those audits are conducted annually and by the certification firm or certification body that is registered with Global Gap, which is a Europe, Cologne, Germany based. Those audits are conducted annually, and there will be a 10% unannounced audit among all the entities that are certified by each certification body. So you will have one audit per year and potentially an unannounced audit. The criteria that are used in the audits, the 236 questions, are divided into 3 levels: major must, minor must, and recommended. To pass an audit or to be certified, you must have 100% compliance with all major must, 95% compliance with all the minor must, and you can or cannot be evaluated on the recommended. It's strongly recommended you adhere to all of them. Now that's the compliance to each of the audit criteria. If you're passing that, then you are what's called in conformity with the audit standard, and that allows you the privilege to market in those channels which recognize the Global Gap standard as adequate for certification. And therefore, you are referred to as a certified entity.
So Mike's talking about the certification for the growers themselves. There's also the laboratories who do sort of investigation processes. Laboratories have to be accredited. Can you speak to the accreditation on the laboratory front?
I can. As I mentioned, we're an ISO 17025 accredited and NELAC accredited laboratory. There are laboratories that exist that really don't have any accreditation, and the FDA has looked at that so that within a 30-month period from January this year, all food testing will have to be completed by an accredited laboratory. Now, the standards for accreditation are yet to be determined. That's one of the things that I'll be talking to the regulators about. But there are accreditation bodies that come in every 2 years and do audits on us. And I think that there will be a narrowing down of certifying bodies as well as laboratories as these standards become more stringent.
So are there any other, food safety issues that you're aware of that we might want to mention to our producers?
Well, there are a couple of big ones. Traceability is always very important. Under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, Section 417, we have a new thing came in a year or so ago called the Reportable Food Registry. And if you have an allegation of an illness, injury, or death, and you have a food safety program called HACCP, Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point, you as a facility are required to respond to the FDA within 24 hours in a Class 1, which means serious adverse health consequences or death, and they will give you an individual case safety report number, and all the information will flow in to that number, and it'll be publicly available. And in the event of a Class 1, the Food Safety Modernization Act will require a posting in the retail establishment where the product was purchased, and so the case will be quickly addressed. The FDA will have mandatory oversight on recalls, And for us in Florida, we have a very, very fortunate position. The University of Florida Food Safety and Human Nutrition Department several years ago drafted the Food Recall Manual. And if you wanted to get it, it's publicly available. It's an EDIS publication, the University of Florida. It's an excellent publication. It guides you right through why a recall, what do you do, how do you do it, and it's free, and it's probably one of the best documents you can have in your file. It'll give you a little indication of what's required in a food recall. But traceability, you have to trace it back, one step back and one step forward, the immediate subsequent recipient. So traceability is going to be very, very important for us, and that's something that's not familiar with many growers. And then the recall option, we hope we never have a recall. In fresh citrus in Florida, we have not had historically a allegation that's been proven on illness, injury, or death. We're very fortunate. In the processed product, there have been some allegations, and they are controlled under the juice rule, the 21 CFR 120, which is an FDA-regulated version.
I actually do have one question that we didn't discuss earlier, but I wanted to just throw it out there because I've been reading a lot about it as one of the more controversial aspects of the Food Safety Modernization Act being the inspection fees. Mm-hmm. Could you speak to the group about the inspection fees and sort of what the controversy there is?
Well, the controversy is that the first inspection is free, and then any subsequent re-inspections, there's an hourly fee of $245 an hour, which includes travel time. So it's almost imperative to avoid that re-inspection. And then there's that time in which you've been inspected and you need to be re-inspected. You're kind of in limbo, and it's kind of a double jeopardy sort of situation. So it's very important, as Mike has stressed, to have everything in order. And I should add that fee includes travel time and multiple people and so on, so it can add up to tens of thousands of dollars very quickly.
Mm-hmm. I know that some ag groups have been getting together to lobby Congress to change that, since previously inspection fees were borne by the taxpayers, right, and now the producers themselves are going to be bearing those fees.
Certainly the way the administration and the regulators are pushing those fees back out to the producers.
Did you have anything else you wanted to mention before we open up for questions?
I think I'm okay.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for our panel on the food safety and the global initiatives? Yes.
Is there a differentiation amongst vegetables, versus ready to eat and like ready to cook? Like a potato versus a tomato?
There's going to be a definition of high risk and low risk foods that has not been promulgated yet. So it's yet to be determined. But I'm sure that probably some of the standards that have been in effect up to now will probably go forward.
No, anybody else? We wrapped up early.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm sure if anybody has any questions, I think both of our panelists will be here for the remainder of the afternoon, and their contact information should be available in the packet.